Emily Carter drove the last nail into the wooden cross with her bare hands. No gloves, no tears left. Just knuckles splitting against frozen ground, blood smearing the wood, and the name she'd carved herself, Grace Ellen Carter. Beloved, gone before she breathed. She stood over that tiny grave until the wind turned savage and the first true snowflakes of the season hit her face like punishment. Then she picked up her saddlebag, turned her back on the only home she'd ever known, and walked straight into the blizzard. She wasn't trying to survive it. If this story already has your heart, do me one favor before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single chapter. And when you're done watching, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Emily and to the night that changed everything. The horse didn't want to go forward. Emily Carter felt it in the animal's muscles, the resistance, the shudder, the way Clover kept pulling her head sideways and stamping at the snow-covered ground like she was trying to say something a horse had no words for. Clover had carried Emily across 3 states without a single complaint. She'd forded rivers, climbed ridge trails that crumbled underfoot, and stood steady through 2 summer lightning storms that would have broken a lesser animal. But she didn't want to go forward tonight. "Come on, girl," Emily said, and even she could hear how hollow her voice sounded, like something that had given up pretending to have weight. "Just a little further." Clover stamped again, tossed her head, blew a long, steaming breath into the frozen air. Emily clicked her tongue and pressed her heels in gently, and the horse moved reluctantly, slowly, like she was carrying something heavier than a woman and a saddlebag. Maybe she was. Maybe animals understood things their riders couldn't admit to themselves. The snow was coming sideways now. It had started as a dusting 3 hours ago, the kind of light snowfall that could make a person feel almost peaceful if they were in the right state of mind. Emily had not been in the right state of mind. She'd barely registered it. She'd ridden out of Millhaven with nothing but a change of clothes, $42 folded inside her boot, her late husband's pocket watch, and a grief so enormous it had stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like weather, something. She simply moved through something that surrounded her completely, something she no longer had any hope of getting out of. Thomas had been gone 8 months. The baby Grace had never quite arrived. 14 hours of labor, then silence, where a cry should have been. The doctor had called it a tragedy. The women of Millhaven had called it God's will. Emily had called it nothing at all, because she'd lost the ability to call anything, anything. She'd just sat in that house for 8 months, while the world kept turning, and people kept telling her that time healed, and that the Lord had a plan, and that she was still young enough to try again, as if Grace were a dress that hadn't fit right the first time, and could simply be reordered from a catalog. She'd woken up the morning before Thanksgiving, and looked at the wooden cross she'd built herself, and driven into the corner of the yard, and something inside her had just stopped. Not broke. Broke would have been dramatic, and Emily had moved past dramatic. It had simply stopped. Like a clock running out of winding, she'd nailed the cross into the ground. She'd whispered something to Grace that she couldn't have repeated afterward. She'd saddled Clover without knowing why, and she'd ridden north because north was the only direction that didn't have a memory attached to it. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. There was no one left to tell who would have understood. Now the blizzard had her, and the trail she'd been following had disappeared somewhere in the last mile under 6 inches of new snow. And Clover was stamping and blowing and doing everything in her power to communicate that forward was wrong, and Emily kept pressing her heels in anyway because she did not particularly care what was wrong. Then Clover stopped completely, planted all 4 feet, and would not move. "Clover!" Emily's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I said move." The horse snorted and turned her head to the left. Emily looked. Through the snow, barely visible, maybe a quarter mile off the trail, a light. A single yellow square of it against all that darkness, and white, small and steady, and certain in a way that nothing in Emily's world had been certain for a very long time. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "All right, girl, all right." And she let the horse choose the direction. The house was set back from the road behind a split-rail fence that had seen better decades. Emily could make out the shape of a barn through the snow, a water trough, the bones of a working ranch that someone was fighting to maintain. It was not a prosperous place, But it was a real one. Smoke coming from the chimney. That yellow light in the window holding steady against the wind. She dismounted at the fence because her legs had gone mostly numb, and she didn't trust herself to ride any closer without falling off. She tied Clover to the post with fingers that could barely close, led herself along the fence line to the gate, and walked up to the front door. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again harder, and this time she heard something movement inside, quick and purposeful, and then a voice saying something low and urgent that she couldn't make out through the door. She knocked a third time. The door opened. The man standing in the doorway was tall, in the way that working men are tall, not performing. It just built that way by years of physical labor that doesn't leave room for softness. Dark hair pushed back like he'd been running a hand through it repeatedly. Jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days. Eyes that had the particular quality Emily had learned to recognize in the past 8 months. The look of someone who was functioning technically, but running entirely on obligation, rather than anything resembling will. How was holding a baby. The baby was screaming. Not crying. Screaming the kind of full-body desperate sound that suggested it had been going on for a while and was not close to stopping. The man looked at Emily standing on his porch covered in snow, and his expression cycled through several things very quickly. Alarm. Confusion. Something like relief that was immediately suppressed by suspicion. "Ma'am," he said, raising his voice over the baby's crying. "Can I help you?" "I got turned around in the storm," Emily said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "My horse wouldn't go any further. I saw your light." He looked past her into the darkness, assessing. She saw his eyes track to Clover at the fence, take in the saddlebag, take in the state of Emily herself, the split knuckles, the snow-soaked coat, the particular blankness in her expression that she'd stopped being able to control. "You alone," he said. "Yes." "Where are you headed?" Emily opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm not entirely sure," she said finally. That seemed to give him pause. He shifted the baby to his other arm, and the baby screamed louder. He winced. It was not the wince of someone being inconvenienced. It was the wince of someone who had been trying everything they knew for what appeared to be a very long time and had run out of ideas. "Your horse needs shelter," he said. "Yes." He stepped back from the door. "Barn's around the left side. I'll show you where." "I can find it." "Find it," Emily said. She didn't want to put him out any more than she already was. You've got your hands full." He looked down at the screaming baby. Something passed across his face that was too complicated to name. "That's one way to put it," he said. She led Clover to the barn herself, working by feel more than sight, and got her unsaddled and into an empty stall with hay and water. Her fingers had stopped cooperating almost entirely by the time she finished, and she had to press them against Clover's neck for a full minute before she could feel them again. Clover turned her big head and breathed warm air directly into Emily's face. "Don't look at me like that," Emily muttered. She walked back to the house and knocked again before entering, even though the man had clearly indicated she should come in. The front room was what she expected: sparse, functional, the home of someone who had organized their life around surviving it rather than enjoying it. A wood stove working hard in the corner, a table with one chair pulled out, a cradle near the stove that was empty, which explained why the baby was not in it. The man was in the middle of the room, still holding the baby, who had dropped from a scream to a sustained and miserable cry, and he was doing what Emily recognized as the walk, that specific desperate circuit that exhausted parents made when nothing else was working. The walk that said, "I don't know what else to do, and I am afraid to stop moving." He looked up when she came in. "Daniel Walker," he said. This is Lily. Emily Carter." She set her saddlebag by the door and pulled off her coat, hanging it on the hook beside his. "How long has she been crying?" "Since about 4 this afternoon." Emily looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 9:30. 5.5 hours, she said, give or take. He kept walking. "She won't eat, won't sleep. I've checked everything I know to check. She doesn't have a fever. Nothing's I don't know what's wrong with her." He said the last sentence very quietly and very carefully, in the way people said things they were terrified of. Emily stood still for a moment. She had not held a baby in a year. She had told herself she would not hold a baby again for as long as she could avoid it, because she knew exactly what it would do to her, and she was not equipped for it. She had been very firm about this with herself. She crossed the room and held out her arms. Daniel Walker looked at her. "Give her to me," Emily said. He hesitated just a beat, the reasonable hesitation of a man handing his infant daughter to a stranger who had appeared out of a blizzard 20 minutes ago, and then he transferred Lily into Emily's arms. Emily settled the baby against her chest, the baby's head against her shoulder, and she began to move. Not the desperate circuit Daniel had been walking. Something different, a slight sway, rhythmic, unhurried. Her hands spread flat against Lily's back, pressure and motion, and the particular quality of stillness that Emily had carried in her chest for a year without knowing what to do with it. She didn't sing. She just held. And within 3 minutes, Lily stopped crying, not all at once. In stages, the screaming became crying. The crying became hiccuping. The hiccuping became the deep shuddering breaths of a baby coming back from the edge of some private distress, and then she was quiet and heavy, and her small fist was curled around the collar of Emily's shirt. The silence in the room was profound. Daniel Walker stood in the middle of his own house and stared. "How did you?" he started. "She was overtired," Emily said, her voice low and even. "Sometimes they get so worked up they can't find their way back down. You have to be steadier than they are." He kept staring. Something moved across his face. Relief, yes, but underneath that something raw and bewildered that he didn't seem to know was showing. "I've been walking her for 5 hours, he said. "I know." Emily kept swaying gently. "You were doing the right thing. You were just too scared to be steady." He flinched. Not as if she'd been cruel, as if she'd said something true. "I'll take her back," he said. "When she's not quite asleep yet." Emily moved to the rocking chair by the stove, sat down, continued the sway and hold. "Give her a few more minutes." Daniel Walker stood in the middle of his kitchen, looking like a man who didn't know what to do with his hands for the first time in his life. He pulled out the chair at the table, sat down, pressed his hands flat on the table surface and looked at them. "There's soup on the stove," he said finally. "If you're hungry, it's not much." "Thank you." "Storm's supposed to run at least 2 more days." "I heard the same." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you actually going, Miss Carter, if you don't mind my asking?" Emily looked down at Lily, whose eyes were finally closing, whose breathing was finally evening out, who weighed almost nothing and everything all at once. "I told you the truth," she said. "I don't know." "You're running from something." "Yes." He didn't ask what. She appreciated that more than she could have said. "You're welcome to stay until the storm passes," he said. "Guest room's not much to look at, but it's warm. I don't want to impose." "Ma'am." His voice had a dry quality to it that she suspected had once been humor, and was now just the shape humor left behind. "You just got my daughter to sleep after 5.5 hours. I think we're past imposing." Emily almost smiled. She didn't, the muscles for it weren't quite working, but she came close, and she felt it, and it surprised her. "All right," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." "Daniel." "Daniel." Lily made a small sound in her sleep, and curled tighter against Emily's shoulder, and Emily sat very still, and let the weight of the baby's trust settle into her like something she didn't deserve and couldn't bring herself to put down. Daniel Walker watched from across the room. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. In the morning, Emily woke before dawn, because she always woke before dawn. Now sleep had become a shallow, treacherous thing this past year. Something she could enter, but never quite stay inside. She lay in the narrow guest bed in the room that smelled of cedar and disuse, and listened to the blizzard working at the eaves, and she thought about getting up and saddling Clover, and riding out into whatever existed on the other side of this storm. She lay there thinking about it for a long time. Then she heard Lily start to cry from across the hall, and heard Daniel's footsteps heavier on the right side, the walk of a man who'd hurt that leg at some point and learned to compensate, and heard him moving around in that particular 3 a.m. silence that parents knew and no one else did. She heard him talking to the baby, low and quiet and helpless in a way that she suspected he would have hated for anyone to overhear. "Come on, Lily girl, come on. What is it? What do you need? I'm right here. I don't know what you need. Tell me what you need." The baby kept crying. Emily stared at the ceiling. She told herself she wasn't going to get involved. She was a stranger here. She was leaving as soon as the storm broke. She had no business making herself necessary in a house that wasn't hers to a man and a baby who had an entire life that had nothing to do with her. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. She put on her boots. She walked across the hall and knocked twice on the door that was already partway open. Daniel turned around. He was still in the clothes he'd worn yesterday, which meant he hadn't slept. He had Lily in the crook of his arm, and he looked at Emily with an expression she recognized, the expression of someone who had stopped being proud about asking for help because they had simply run out of time for pride. "Is she feeding?" Emily asked. "Won't take the bottle. Is the milk warm enough?" He blinked. I heat it." "How long do you heat it?" "Until it doesn't feel cold anymore." Emily held out her hand for the bottle. He gave it to her without argument. She ran more hot water over it from the pitcher on the dresser, tested it on the inside of her wrist, the way she'd watched other women do 100 times, waited another 30 seconds, tested again. "Here," she said, handing it back. Then she took Lily from him. "Tuck her against your arm a little further, yes, like that. Hold the bottle at more of an angle so she's not working so hard for it." He adjusted. Lily fussed for a moment, then found the bottle, then began to drink with the focused intensity of a baby who had been hungry for longer than she'd wanted to be. The relief on Daniel Walker's face was the most unguarded thing Emily had seen in a year. "Thank you," he said. It came out rough, like it had been dragged up from somewhere. "She's just particular," Emily said. "Some babies are." "I didn't know." He didn't look at her when he said it. "I didn't know any of this. I thought I'd figure it out. That it would come to me." "It does come. It just takes longer than you expect." Her mother would have known from the start. Emily didn't say anything for a moment. "Maybe," she said. Or maybe her mother would have been awake at 3 in the morning testing the milk temperature too. "Nobody knows from the start, Daniel. They just pretend they do because they're scared." He looked at her, then directly the way people looked at each other when something true had been said in a space where true things were rare. "You said you were running," he said. "Yes." "From what?" Emily watched Lily drink, watched the baby's small hand flex and close against the fabric of Daniel's shirt. "I lost my daughter," she said. She didn't make it. And I lost my husband before that. And I woke up yesterday morning and looked at the grave I'd put in the corner of my yard, and I just couldn't anymore. I couldn't be in that house another day." Daniel was very still. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't." She said it gently. "Please don't. I've had a year of people being sorry, and it doesn't help. I know they mean it. It just doesn't help." "What does help?" She thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which was something she hadn't done because no one had ever asked her that before. "This," she said finally. "Having something to do. Having something that needs me. I know it's not mine. I know she's not mine. I'm not confused about that. But having something to do with my hands that matters. That helps." He nodded slowly. "I understand that. I reckon you might." They sat in that pre-dawn quiet while Lily finished the bottle and the blizzard pushed at the walls of the house, and both of them kept not looking at each other in the careful way of people who are deciding whether it is safe to be understood. By the time the sun came up, pale and distant through clouds that had no intention of clearing, Emily was making breakfast, and Daniel was in the barn doing the morning chores, and Lily was asleep in the cradle near the stove, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and bacon, and something that Emily had not smelled in a very long time. It took her until she was setting plates on the table to realize what it was. It smelled like a morning someone intended to get through, not escape, not endure. Get through, as in toward something on the other side. Daniel came back from the barn stomping snow off his boots and stopped in the doorway when he saw the table set and the food ready, and the expression that crossed his face was brief and quickly suppressed the expression of a man who had forgotten what it looked like when someone did something for him. "You didn't have to," he said. I was making it for myself anyway. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking. Sit down. He sat down. They ate. Not in the particular silence of people who have nothing to say, but in the more complicated silence of people who have too much and are deciding how much of it is safe. You've been alone since she was born, Emily asked. With Lily. My sister was here for the first month. Then she had to get back to her own family in Billings. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. We manage. You're managing. That's what I said. That's a different thing than what I said. He looked at her. Managing is surviving, Emily said. I've been managing for a year. I know what it looks like from the inside. The house is clean and the work gets done and everyone who sees you thinks you're all right, and you know that you're not, but you've lost the words to explain the difference. She picked up her fork. You're managing Daniel. That's not nothing. But it ain't the same as being okay. He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. It ain't. Outside, the blizzard buried the roads another foot deeper, and the temperature dropped until the window glass groaned in its frame, and inside the small ranch house on the empty Montana plain, two people who had both run out of reasons to hope sat across a table from each other and ate breakfast and did not say anything else for a while. But neither of them got up to leave. That afternoon, Emily was heating water for the laundry. She'd found a basket of Daniel's things that had apparently been waiting a week for attention and had simply set to doing it without asking when she heard him come back from the far barn and stop in the doorway. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. Miss Carter. Emily. Emily. He said it like he was trying the weight of it. You're a guest. You don't have to. Daniel. She didn't turn around. I need to be useful, or I will lose my mind. Please let me be useful. A long pause. All right, he said. He came inside and took off his coat and gloves and hung them up, and then he sat at the table and began cleaning the rifle he'd brought in from the barn, and they worked in the same room without talking, and Lily slept in her cradle between them, and the blizzard did not relent. Late in the afternoon, when the light was going gray, and early outside, Lily woke up, and Emily went to the cradle without thinking, and picked her up, and carried her to the window, and held her there, while she showed her the snow coming down. That's a blizzard, Lily girl, she said quietly. Your daddy's going to have a lot of fence to check when it clears. You're going to have to be patient with him. Lily looked at the window with the complete and earnest attention of a baby who was not yet old enough to know that the world could disappoint her. Emily felt the pressure of it in her chest, the specific weight of a baby who trusted you, who knew nothing about whether you deserved to be trusted, who simply rested her warm head against your shoulder and breathed. I had a daughter, Emily told her. Quiet enough that Daniel across the room almost certainly couldn't hear. She never got to see snow. I used to think I'd take her sledding, teach her to catch snowflakes on her tongue. Stupid little things that you think of when you're expecting. All the things you're going to do. Lily reached up and grabbed a strand of Emily's hair. Don't you dare let go of anything too soon, Emily whispered. You hear me? You hold on to everything. She felt Daniel's eyes on her back. She didn't turn around. At supper, he made the meal biscuits and venison stew, plain and filling, and set her place at the table without comment, and they ate again in that same complicated silence, and somewhere in the middle of it, Daniel said, Tell me about your husband. She looked up. If you want, he added quickly. You don't have to. Thomas, she said. His name was Thomas. He was a good man. He was the kind of good that's quiet about it. Didn't make speeches, just did things. Fixed the fence before you noticed it needed fixing. Brought home medicine before you knew you were sick. She set down her spoon. I didn't know what I had until I was trying to figure out how to live without it. Daniel nodded, looking at his bowl. Lily's mother, he said. Her name was Sarah. He stopped, tried again. She talked too much. That's what I always said. Lord, that woman could talk. I used to pretend to be annoyed by it. He shook his head slowly. What I wouldn't give to have noise in this house again. Emily looked at him. There's noise, she said. Your daughter makes a considerable amount of it. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, the shape underneath where a smile would be. That she does. She's going to talk your ears off, Emily said. Give her a year and a half. You won't be able to get a word in. He looked at Lily dozing in the cradle. The shape of a smile got fractionally closer to the real thing. Yeah, he said softly. I reckon. The second day of the blizzard, Emily taught Daniel how to hold the bottle properly and how to read the difference between Lily's hungry cry and her tired cry and her lonely cry. Daniel was a good student, serious, attentive, not too proud to ask the same thing twice when he wasn't sure he'd got it right. She doesn't need you to be perfect, Emily told him, watching him figure out the blanket wrap she'd shown him. She needs you to keep showing up. That's all a baby is asking for. Just keep showing up. He tucked the last fold of the blanket in. Lily immediately looked more settled. Is that what you needed? He asked, not looking up. Someone to keep showing up. Emily didn't answer right away. After Thomas died, she said, people came around for a while. Neighbors, ladies from the church. They brought food and said the things people say. And then it was winter, and the roads were bad, and they stopped coming around, and that was fine. I understood. People have their own lives. She crossed her arms over her chest. But I kept waking up, and there was nobody there. Not because they didn't care, just because nobody knew to come back. Nobody kept showing up, Daniel said. Nobody kept showing up. He looked at Lily, quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about the spring, he said. About what happens when the ranch gets busier and I don't have anyone to... He stopped. I reckon I'll figure it out. You will, Emily said. But you don't have to figure it out today. He looked at her with that same expression as before, the one that was about something true being said in a space where true things were rare. No, he agreed. I reckon I don't. That evening when Lily had gone to sleep and the dishes were done and the stove was stoked for the night, Emily sat in the rocking chair with the pocket watch in her hand. Thomas's watch, gold-cased with the engraving on the back that she'd had put there for their second anniversary, forward always. She hadn't opened it since the day he died. She opened it now, just looked at the face of it. The hands still moving, still marking time, indifferent to whether she wanted it to or not. Daniel came back from checking the barn and saw her sitting there with it and didn't say anything. He put more wood on the fire and sat down in the chair on the other side of the stove. Someone you lost, he said after a while. My husband. It was his. She turned it over, showed him the inscription without saying anything. He read it, looked at her. Forward always, he said. How was practical like that? He thought sentiment needed a direction, or it was just self-pity. She closed the watch, held it. I thought it was funny when I had it engraved. Later it just seemed cruel. Forward to what? Forward to this? Maybe forward to here, Daniel said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. I'm not saying this is where you're supposed to be forever. I'm not saying that. But you're here tonight, and Lily's sleeping, and you're not alone in a field somewhere. He looked back at the fire. That's forward. It's not much, but it's something. Emily sat with that for a while. You're better at this than you think, she said finally. At what? At knowing what to say. He shook his head. I don't know what I'm doing any more than Lily does. Nobody does, Emily said. But you just said the right thing. The first right thing anyone said to me in a year. So. He didn't answer that. But he didn't disagree with it either. The blizzard pressed against the house, and the fire burned low and rebuilt itself and burned low again, and the night passed in that particular quality of quiet that only comes when a storm has sealed you inside somewhere, and the rest of the world has ceased to have any claim on you for a while, and Emily sat in the rocking chair with Thomas's watch in her hand, and felt for the first time in a year that she was somewhere instead of nowhere. She didn't know what to do with that yet, but she let herself feel it. And when she finally went to bed and lay in the narrow cedar-smelling room listening to the blizzard, she didn't think about the grave in the corner of the yard in Mill Haven. She thought about Lily's hand curled around her collar. And she thought about a man who looked at a pocket watch and said forward to here like it was a small but sufficient truth. and she thought that maybe, just maybe, small and sufficient was more than she'd had any right to expect. She did not think about what would happen when the storm cleared. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight she let herself be where she was. And she slept for the first time in a year past dawn. She slept past dawn. That was the thing that hit her first. When she opened her eyes, the light was wrong. Too bright, too high. She hadn't slept past dawn in 14 months. Not once. Her body had rewired itself in the weeks after Thomas died, jolting her awake in the gray hours before sunrise, dropping her into consciousness, like a stone into cold water, leaving her lying in a silence that pressed down on her chest until she got up just to prove she could still move. But this morning she had slept past dawn. She lay still for a moment and listened. The blizzard was quieter. Not gone, she could still hear it working at the corners of the house, but it had dropped from a roar to a steady push, the kind of storm that had settled into itself and decided to stay a while without making a spectacle of it. She heard the wood stove ticking. She heard from somewhere in the house the low sound of Daniel's voice, and underneath it, almost buried, the small sounds of Lily awake and not yet crying. She got up, pulled on her clothes, walked out into the hall. Daniel was sitting in the rocking chair by the stove with Lily against his chest, talking to her the way she'd heard him do it before, low and quiet and slightly helpless, except that this morning there was something different in it. He'd gotten the blanket wrap right. Not perfect, but close enough that Lily was settled against him in a way that looked less like endurance and more like trust. He looked up when Emily came out. "She ate," he said. And the way he said it, 2 words, no decoration, carried about 47 other things inside it. Emily looked at Lily's face. Milk drowsy, heavy-lidded, her small fist pressed against Daniel's shirt. "Good," Emily said. "What temperature did you get the bottle?" "Warm on the inside of my wrist." He said it the way a man repeated back something he'd committed to memory because he understood it mattered. "Waited an extra 30 seconds like you said." And she took it. First try. Emily went to the stove and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot he'd already made. She stood there and drank half of it before she trusted herself to say anything else, because the image of him sitting in that chair with the blanket done right, and the baby fed the simple competence of a man who had listened and tried and gotten it right, that image was doing something to her chest that she didn't entirely have the language for. "You should have woken me," she said finally. "You needed the sleep. That's not your call to make." He looked at her, a long, level look. "No," he agreed. "I reckon it ain't. Won't happen again." She nodded, poured more coffee, set a second cup on the table in front of his chair without being asked. He looked at the cup, then at her. He picked it up and drank and didn't say thank you, and she appreciated that the way some people could accept a thing without making a ceremony of it, the way that accepting something gracefully was its own kind of grace. Outside, the blizzard continued its steady, patient work. It was the second full day. The morning went the way the previous morning had gone, except with less strangeness in it, as if the house had recalibrated itself around 3 people instead of 2, and was simply proceeding on that basis. Daniel did the barn chores. Emily made breakfast. Lily slept and woke and ate and slept again in the cradle near the stove. The routine had a shape to it that neither of them had named, because naming it would have required acknowledging that it was a thing, and neither of them was ready for that. Around mid-morning, Emily was at the table with Lily in her lap when the baby grabbed her finger and held on with that absolute infant conviction, the grip that understood nothing about the world except that it wanted to hold on to whatever it had found. Emily looked down at that grip for a long moment. "She likes you," Daniel said from across the room. He was mending a piece of harness leatherwork he'd brought in from the barn, practical something to do with his hands. "She likes warmth," Emily said. "She can tell the difference. Babies can't." "Emily." His voice was patient. "She screamed for 5.5 hours before you got here. She's been quiet most of 2 days since. She can tell the difference." Emily didn't have an answer for that. She looked back down at Lily's grip on her finger. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't make it mean something it doesn't." He set down the harness. "What does it mean?" She needed someone. Anyone steady would have done. "Is that what you tell yourself?" The question landed harder than he probably meant it to. She felt it in her sternum, the particular accuracy of it, the way a true thing hit differently than a kind thing. "Daniel," she said, "I'm not trying to—" He picked the harness back up. "I just think you sell yourself short, that's all. You don't have to answer it." She didn't answer it. But she didn't put Lily down either. That afternoon was when things shifted the first time. She was heating water on the stove, more laundry, because it turned out a ranch with an infant generated a genuinely remarkable amount of laundry, and Emily found that she minded this not at all when she knocked the pot handle and caught it before it could fall and burned her palm in the process. She didn't cry out. She pressed her lips together and set the pot down carefully and turned to the water basin and plunged her hand in. And that was when Daniel came in from checking the livestock water and saw her standing at the basin with her jaw tight. He crossed the room in 4 strides. "Let me see. It's nothing. Emily." He said her name the way you said a name when you were done negotiating. He took her wrist gently, firmly, not asking, and turned her hand over in his. The burn was across the meat of her palm. Red, serious, the kind that would blister by tonight. He didn't say anything. He went to the cabinet and came back with a tin of salve and a strip of clean cloth, and he stood there and applied the salve with the careful attention of a man who'd learned field medicine the hard way and knew what he was doing. His hands were rough, but his touch was precise, and he didn't rush, and he didn't talk, and Emily stood still and let him do it. "I can do that myself," she said, mostly because she felt like she was supposed to. "I know you can." He tied off the cloth. "Doesn't mean you have to." She looked at her wrapped hand, then at him. How was closer than he'd been before, in the way that tending to an injury required closeness without making a choice of it. She could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the gray that was starting to come into his hair at the temples, the specific exhaustion that lived below his surface like groundwater present everywhere, not visible until you knew to look. "Thank you," she said. He stepped back. "Just enough. Don't knock any more pot handles. I'll make a note." That almost smile again. The shape of it. She was getting better at reading his face, the economy of it, the way he felt things in small increments rather than large ones, the way the feelings were all there, just stored somewhere deeper than most people kept them. She understood that architecture. She lived in it herself. The afternoon turned into the kind of gray that was neither day nor evening. The blizzard holding everything in suspension, and Daniel came in from his last outside check, and Emily had supper on the table, not the soup she'd planned because she'd found better ingredients than she'd expected in his cellar. A man who laid up provisions seriously, and she'd made a proper stew with root vegetables and the smoked beef and biscuits that came out better than she could account for, given the quality of the stove. He sat down and looked at the table. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know. I feel like I keep saying that." "You do." He picked up his fork. "I'm not good at being—" He stopped, started again. "I've been alone long enough that I forget how to have someone else in the house. How do I keep feeling like I should be offering something, pulling some weight, and instead you're cooking my supper and minding my daughter and—" "You saddled my horse when you checked the barn this afternoon," Emily said. He looked up. "I saw you through the window," she said. "You checked her water and her feet and you rebedded her stall. You didn't say anything about it." A pause. "She seemed uncomfortable," he said. "She was. I was going to get to it this evening." Emily met his eyes. "You pulled your weight, Daniel. You just didn't announce it." He looked at his food. "Thomas used to say that the people who needed to tell you they were helping weren't really helping," Emily said. "The people who were actually helping were too busy to mention it." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I knew." She said it without flinching, which was new. For months the sentence had been impossible to complete out loud. "I think you would have liked each other." "Yeah." He didn't have much patience for talking either. "You would have gotten along fine." Daniel made a sound that was unmistakably a short laugh. Just a breath of one. But real. Emily felt something shift in her chest, small and tentative, like a door that had been stuck for a long time and had just moved an inch. She didn't push it, but she noticed it. After supper with Lily, asleep and the dishes done, and the stove stoked, and the blizzard doing its patient work outside. Daniel sat at the table with a glass of whiskey and didn't offer her any, and then caught himself and looked up. "I've got—" "No, thank you." He nodded, turned the glass in his hands. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "When you left, when you rode out into the storm, what were you actually thinking? Where you were going?" Emily considered the question. "I wasn't thinking about where," she said. "I was thinking about whether. Whether I was going to keep going, or whether I was going to stop somewhere in the snow and let the cold make the decision." He went very still. "Emily, I'm telling you the truth because you asked me directly. I wasn't fully decided. I hadn't made up my mind. I just knew I couldn't be in that house one more day, and I didn't particularly care what happened after that." She looked at her wrapped hand on the table. "And then Clover stopped and I saw your light, and I thought there's a reason. Maybe there's a reason. I'm going to see what it is." The silence was different after that. Daniel set down his glass. He looked at her for a long moment, not with pity, which she would have hated, and not with horror, which would have been worse, with the particular expression of someone who understood something they wished they'd understood sooner. "I had a night like that," he said. "About 6 weeks after Lily was born. She'd been crying for hours, and I'd run out of everything, every resource I had. And I stood on the front porch in the October cold, and I looked out at the dark, and I thought I could walk into that. I could just walk out there and keep going. And I thought about it for maybe 10 minutes. He picked up his glass again, didn't drink. And then she cried again, and I went back in." Emily looked at him. "She called you back," she said. "She didn't know she was doing it." "It doesn't matter if she—" Emily's voice was steady. "She called you back, and you went. That's not nothing, Daniel. That's everything." He looked at the glass in his hands. "I've never said that out loud before," he said. "I know." She didn't explain how she knew. She just knew. "It's all right. It doesn't have to go further than this room." He nodded slowly. Outside, the blizzard made a sound like the whole world turning over in its sleep. "You went back in for her," Emily said. "And I saw your light and I came to the door. Maybe that's what surviving looks like sometimes. It's not a decision you make all at once. It's just the next small thing. Clover stops. You go see why. The door opens. You go inside." Daniel looked at her. "Forward to here," he said. She recognized her husband's words in his mouth, and somehow they didn't hurt the way she'd expected. "Forward to here," she agreed. They sat in that quiet for a while, and it was not the silence of two strangers anymore. It was something else, something that had no name yet and didn't need one. The fire worked in the stove. The blizzard pressed at the walls and found them solid. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and settled. It was late when Emily finally stood to go to bed. She was at the hallway when Daniel said her name. She turned. He was still at the table. He'd turned the glass over empty now and was looking at it. "I'm glad you saw the light," he said. She stood in the hallway entrance for a long moment. "So am I," she said. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a while. The third morning of the blizzard arrived with a change in the light that everyone who'd lived through Montana winters recognized, a particular quality of the white outside the windows that suggested the storm was not ending, but was entering a new phase, settling from violence into insistence. The wind had dropped. The snow was still coming. But the house was no longer under siege. It was simply encircled. Emily dressed and came out and found Daniel already back from the barn, and Lily awake in the cradle, eyes open and tracking movement with the focused interest of a baby who was discovering that the world contained things worth watching. "Storm's shifting," Daniel said. "Might break by tomorrow, might not." "Does it matter?" Emily asked. He looked at her. "My horse is warm and fed," she said, and went to put the coffee on. He sat at the table while she made breakfast and didn't pretend to have something to do in the barn. He just sat there, and Lily was in his arms, and he was holding her the way Emily had shown him, tucked, correctly supported, right, the grip of a man who had stopped being afraid of the fragility and started trusting himself with it. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. Halfway through the morning, Lily was fussing again, not crying, just that low-grade discontent that could tip either direction, and Emily picked her up and walked with her to the window and started doing the sway and hold, and she found herself talking. "Her name was Grace," she said. Daniel, who had been at the table, went still. I was 31 weeks. It was early. The doctor said these things happen. Everybody said these things happen. Her voice was even. She'd told herself this story enough times that she could tell it without breaking, at least for a while. Thomas was holding my hand the whole time. He didn't flinch once. And when it was over, and when they told us, he didn't say anything for about 20 minutes, just held my hand. And then he said, "We're going to be all right. It's going to take a while, but we're going to be all right." Lily had gone quiet. She was looking at the window. "He died 4 months later," Emily said. "He never saw the spring. And I sat in that house all winter and all spring and all summer, thinking that he'd promised me we were going to be all right, and he didn't stay to see it happen." She heard Daniel push back his chair. "Emily, I'm not—" She shook her head slightly. "I'm not falling apart. I just wanted to say her name, to someone. I've said Grace out loud maybe 4 times this whole year. People get uncomfortable. They don't know what to do when you name them." She pressed her lips to the top of Lily's head without thinking. But she had a name. She was real. She deserves to have her name said. Daniel came and stood beside her. Not close enough to intrude. Just present. The way he was present, which was without making a noise about it. "Grace," he said. Just that. Just her daughter's name in someone else's mouth for maybe the 2nd time in a year. Emily's eyes filled. She didn't let the tears fall. She blinked them back hard, jaw tight, but her hands on Lily tightened slightly. "Thank you," she said. Her voice barely held. "Sarah," he said then. "My wife. Her name was Sarah, and she laughed too loud. Every time. She'd be embarrassed about it, cover her mouth with her hand, but you could still hear it. Right through her hand." He was looking at the falling snow. "I keep waiting for the house to stop feeling like she should be in it. 9 months, and I keep thinking I hear her." "You will for a while," Emily said. "And then one day you don't hear it anymore, and that's harder." He looked at her. "I know," she said quietly. "It doesn't seem like it would be. But it is." He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd been afraid to think. They stood at the window together, not touching, not close, just occupying the same space, with the same weight of loss between them, and Lily in Emily's arms looked at the snow with her clear, untroubled eyes. That was the 2nd time things shifted. Lunch was quieter than breakfast had been. Not uncomfortably. Just the quiet of 2 people who had said things that couldn't be unsaid and were making room for them. Emily made cornbread and warmed the rest of the stew and set it on the table, and Daniel ate like a man who'd remembered that eating was something you did for reasons beyond fuel. "You cook like someone who's fed people," he said, not a question. "Thomas had a large appetite," she said, "and he'd invite people home without warning. I learned to make things that could stretch. I keep burning everything. You're distracted when you cook. I'm always distracted. When Lily's older, she can sit in the kitchen with you, give you something to talk to while you're at the stove. It helps." Emily looked up. "My mother used to talk to me the whole time she cooked. I didn't understand half of what she said. I was too small, but it kept her calm, and I liked the sound of it." He was watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He looked at his bowl. You know things. About how to make a life work. You know a lot of things about how to make things work, and you keep using the past tense for all of them, like you're done knowing them." The observation was so precise it took her a moment to locate a response. "They don't feel like they belong to me anymore," she said finally. "The things I knew. They feel like they belong to a version of me that doesn't exist. But the knowledge is still there. It doesn't do me much good. It did Lily good." He said it plainly without weight on it, just as a fact. "It did me good. So whatever version of you carried that knowledge, it matters that she came to this door." Emily set down her spoon. She looked at him for a long moment, at the serious, weathered face. the eyes that watched the world with a precision that missed very little. The man who said things plainly because he had learned that ornamented words cost too much. "You're going to make me cry," she said, "and I have a real objection to crying." That surprised something out of him. A real laugh this time, short and genuine, and it changed his face completely. Made him look briefly like the man he'd been before the weight settled on him. "Noted," he said. She picked her spoon back up, ate, and she was fighting a smile, actually fighting it, the muscles of her face doing something they hadn't done in a year. She won, mostly, but it was close. The afternoon brought the first real test. Lily had been fine all morning, better than fine, alert and fed, and engaging with the world, with her small, serious attention. But around 2 o'clock, she began to fuss, and the fussing escalated quickly, and when Emily checked her, she found what she'd been half watching for the baby was warm. Not burning, not the dangerous heat of a sick infant, but elevated enough to mean something was starting. She brought Lily to Daniel, who was mending the second piece of harness. "She's running warm," Emily said. He looked up immediately and took the baby, put his cheek against her forehead, and she watched his face change, watched the color drop out of it, and the old terror come rushing back, like water through a broken dam. "How warm?" His voice had changed. "Not dangerously. She's not sick yet, but we should watch her. What do we—" He was already on his feet, holding Lily against his chest, his jaw locked. "What do we do? What does she need?" "Daniel." Emily put her hand on his arm. He stopped. "Look at me." He looked at her. His eyes were doing something frightening, that particular blank quality that was fear so large it had stopped looking like fear. "She's warm," Emily said clearly. "That's all we know right now. Babies run warm sometimes. It doesn't mean—" Her mother had a fever. The words came out flat and terrible. At the end, it started slow. They said it was nothing. And then, "This is not that," Emily said, hard and certain. "This is a baby who might be coming down with a cold from the temperature change, because you've been opening that barn door 15 times a day and Lily's been near the draft. This is not what happened to Sarah." He stared at her. "I need you to stay with me right now," Emily said. "I need you here. Can you do that?" A long pause. She could feel the tremor in his arm through her hand on it. "Tell me what to do," he said. "We're going to keep her warm, but not too warm. Strip the extra blanket. Keep her against your chest where she can hear your heartbeat. It helps. We're going to watch her. We're going to take it 1 hour at a time. And you are going to talk to me out loud every time you feel the fear getting too big. You don't carry that alone in this house. You hear me?" He swallowed hard. "I hear you," he said. "Good." Emily released his arm. "Sit down. Hold her. I'm right here." He sat. He held Lily against his chest, and Emily pulled the other chair up close and sat beside him, and they watched the baby together, and it was nothing like what had happened to Sarah. Emily was certain of that. Certain with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had known her share of genuine catastrophe, and could tell the difference between it and the fear of catastrophe. But she understood the fear. She understood it completely. An hour passed. Then another. Lily fussed and drowsed and fussed again, the low-grade misery of an infant who felt unwell and had no vocabulary for it beyond sound. Daniel held her the whole time. Not the desperate circuit walking of the first night, but something different. A contained, purposeful stillness. A man making himself a fixed point for something small and scared to anchor to. Emily stayed. She made tea she didn't particularly want. She kept her voice steady. Every time she felt Daniel beginning to spiral back toward that blankness, she said something concrete, the baby's color, her breathing, the way she was still taking small sips of water, the things that were normal and remained normal. Around 5 in the evening, Lily's temperature leveled out. By 6, it was dropping. By 7, the baby was asleep on Daniel's chest, with the deep total sleep of an infant who had exhausted herself with discomfort and had found her way back to the other side of it. Daniel sat in the chair and did not move. "She's all right," Emily said. He had his cheek resting on top of Lily's head, and his eyes were closed, and he did not respond for a moment. Then, I know. Daniel, I know. He opened his eyes. They were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the firelight. I know she's all right. I need another minute. Take it, Emily said. He took it. She sat across from him and let him have whatever he needed, and the fire worked quietly in the stove, and outside the blizzard had gone fully to insistence rather than violence, steady and determined, committed to its work. After a while, Daniel said, I broke down when I thought she was sick. You held on, Emily said. You stayed in your chair. You talked to me. You didn't run out into the snow. That's not breaking down. I was terrified. I know. I'm always terrified. He said it like a confession. Every single day. I'm terrified I'm going to do it wrong and she's going to pay for it. I'm terrified I'm going to miss something important, something obvious, something any real father would have noticed right away. He shifted slightly so he could look at Emily without disturbing the baby. I'm terrified that if something happens to her, I won't survive it. And I don't mean that the way you meant it that night in the snow. I mean I built everything around her, after Sarah died. Lily was the only reason I got up, the only reason any of it made sense. And if I lost her... He stopped. You won't, Emily said. You can't know that. No, she agreed. I can't. Nobody can. And that's the thing, you're going to have to find a way to live inside of Daniel, because there isn't a promise in the world that covers it. You hold on. You love them as hard as you can, and you hold on, and you know that whatever happens, you love them as hard as you could. He looked at her. Is that what you do? He said. With grace, the name in his mouth again. She'd given it to him, and he was using it. He was trusting himself to use it. It's what I'm trying to learn to do, she said honestly. I'm not there yet. I'm still in the part where it just hurts, where the love and the loss are all tangled up, and I can't find the edges of either one. She looked at her hands, at the bandaged one and the unbandaged one. But I'm starting to think that maybe that's not a problem to solve. Maybe that's just what it feels like to have loved someone. Silence. Then Daniel said very quietly, Yeah, just that. Just the one word, weighted with everything they'd both lost, and were still somehow here in spite of. Lily slept on between them. The fire continued its work, and Emily Carter, who had ridden into a blizzard 3 days ago, not particularly caring what happened next, sat in a stranger's chair in a stranger's house and felt against every expectation she'd had of herself that she was not done. She had believed herself finished. She was beginning to suspect she was wrong. That was the most frightening thing she'd felt in a year. And the most alive. Lily's fever broke completely sometime in the night. Emily knew it before she checked. She heard it in the quality of the baby's breathing through the thin wall between their rooms, that particular shift from shallow and labored to the deep, even pull of real sleep. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to it, and felt the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders for 6 straight hours finally slowly begin to let go. She got up anyway. She padded across the hall in her socked feet and eased the door open and looked in. Daniel was in the chair beside the cradle, asleep, his head tipped back and his arms loose in his lap, the posture of a man who had fought to stay awake and lost. Lily was in the cradle on her back, both fists raised beside her head in that instinctive infant surrender, her chest rising and falling with steady, uncomplicated ease. Emily stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at the two of them. Then she pulled the door most of the way closed and went and put coffee on because someone was going to need it, and it might as well be ready. Daniel came out 20 minutes later, moving the way people moved when they'd slept in a chair, carefully, like their body was filing a formal complaint. He stopped when he smelled the coffee. He looked at Emily at the stove. She's better, he said. Completely, Emily said. Check her yourself if you need to, but she's better. I went back to check. She heard the small sounds of it, his footsteps, the particular quiet he moved with when Lily was sleeping. Then he came back out, and the look on his face was the wrung-out, boneless relief of a man who had been braced for the worst for 8 straight hours and had just been told he could stand down. He sat at the table and put his face in his hands. Emily set a cup in front of him, She didn't say anything. After a moment, he dragged his hands down his face and picked up the cup. "I owe you," he said. "You don't." "Emily." "You don't," she said again firmly and without softness. "What I did last night was not, you don't put a tab on that Daniel. That's not how that works." He looked at her. The morning light was thin through the window, the blizzard still running outside, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and something about the rawness of him. In this particular moment, the defenses down, the pride packed away somewhere out of necessity, made her look away first. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." They drank their coffee. The morning had a different texture than the ones before it. Something had shifted in the night, some threshold crossed, that neither of them could have mapped precisely the way you couldn't always say exactly when twilight became dark, only that it had. They moved around the kitchen with a familiarity that shouldn't have existed yet, a calibrated awareness of where the other person was, the small adjustments people made when they'd learned the shape of someone else's presence. Daniel made the biscuits. Emily watched this without comment. He was bad at it. The dough was too thick, and he knew it. She could see it in the set of his mouth, the slight frustration of a man who'd been doing something wrong for months and hadn't quite figured out where the error was. "More flour," she said. "I put flour." "More. And you're working it too hard. It's biscuit dough, not fence post." He gave her a look. "I'm just saying." He added flour. He worked it less. The biscuits that came out of the oven were not perfect. They never were. The first time you corrected a bad habit, but they were better, and he ate 2 of them with the satisfaction of a man who had improved a thing. "Better," Emily said. "Passable," he said. "High praise from a Montana rancher." He looked at her. "You've known me 3 days." "I know you well enough." Howe was quiet for a moment, turning his cup in his hands. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I reckon you do." That landed somewhere neither of them acknowledged directly, and they finished breakfast in that charged, careful silence. And Lily woke up with a full-throated announcement of her morning displeasure, and Daniel got up and got her without hesitation. No panic, no long moment of preparatory bracing, just got up and went to her, and came back with her tucked in the crook of his arm, and she quieted almost immediately. Emily noticed. She didn't say anything about that either, but she noticed. Mid-morning brought the first surprise of the day. Daniel came in from what should have been a quick check on the far livestock tank, a 20-minute trip at most, and he'd been gone nearly an hour, and when he came through the door, his coat was soaked through and his expression was the closed-off, controlled look of a man managing bad news. "The east fence line's down," he said. "The snow weight got 3 posts. My cattle are in the creek field." Emily looked up from Lily, who was on her lap working on a bottle. "How many head be 40 give or take?" He was already pulling off the wet coat, hanging it, reaching for the spare. "If they drift too far east, they'll hit the ridge road. If someone else's stock is moving the same direction, you need to go now. Storm's still running." "I know." He paused with his hand on the spare coat. He looked at her and Lily together, and something moved across his face that he didn't fully suppress. "She's fine," Emily said. "Her color's good, she's eating, she's warm. Go fix your fence." Emily. "Daniel." She said it the way he'd said her name 2 days ago, done negotiating, patient but final. "She is fine. I am right here. Go take care of your ranch." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he took the coat. 2 hours, he said. "Take what you need." He hesitated at the door. And here was the thing that caught her, the thing that lodged itself somewhere below her sternum and stayed. He didn't hesitate because he didn't trust her. He hesitated because leaving them was hard. Because walking out the door and away from the 2 of them in this house was a thing he had to make himself do, and she could see him making himself do it, and the effort of it was visible on his face. He went. Emily sat in the rocking chair with Lily and listened to the blizzard and didn't examine what she'd just seen too carefully, because examining it would have required deciding what it meant, and she wasn't ready for that particular reckoning. Lily finished the bottle and fell into the drowsy semi-sleep of a fed baby, warm and heavy and trusting. Emily rocked her and looked at the fire and thought about the fence Daniel was fighting out in the snow, and found herself tracking the time in a way she hadn't tracked anything in a year. He was back in an hour and 40 minutes. He came in stamping snow and was cold through to the bone. She could tell by the way he moved, stiff jaw, tight fingers, not entirely cooperative with his bootlaces. And she got up without a word and brought the coffee pot and poured it and set it close to the stove, where the cup would stay warm, and set a bowl of the soup she'd kept on the back burner in front of the chair nearest the heat. He sat. He ate. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Got all 40 back in the near field," he said. "Improvise 2 posts. It'll hold until the storm breaks." "Good." He ate more soup. Looked at Lily asleep in the cradle. "She all right?" "Perfect." He nodded, kept eating, and then he said without looking up, "Thank you for staying with her." "You don't have to thank me for—" "I know I don't have to." He looked up then. "I wanted to." She held his gaze for a moment. "You're welcome," she said. It was the first time she'd accepted one of his thanks directly, and she saw him register it, saw the slight adjustment in his expression. Something settling, something that had been uncertain, becoming less so. They were getting better at this. At being 2 people in the same house who needed things from each other and were learning slowly not to flinch from the needing. The afternoon started quietly and then detonated. Emily was putting Lily down for her afternoon sleep. She'd gotten good at the particular combination of motion and warmth that eased the baby into it, had learned Lily's specific preferences with the precise attention of a woman who had nothing else to put her precision into when she heard Daniel come in from the barn with a different quality of step. She came out of the back room and looked at him. He was standing at the table holding a piece of paper. "What is it?" she said. "Found it in my coat pocket." He held it up. "From my sister. She sent it with the supply man before the storm hit. I forgot I'd put it there." "What does it say?" He set it on the table. He smoothed it flat with one hand, which was a thing people did when they needed a moment before speaking. "She's coming," he said. "After the snow clears. She's planning to stay for 2 weeks to help with Lily." He paused. "And she's bringing her neighbor, a widow woman. She says she thinks it would do me good to have some company. That I've been alone too long." He picked up the letter and then set it back down. "She's been trying to match me with someone for 6 months." Emily stood in the kitchen doorway. She did not examine what moved through her at the word match. She simply acknowledged that something moved, filed it, and kept her face level. That's kind of her," she said. "It's interference," Daniel said. But he said it without real heat. He said it like a man reciting a grievance he'd repeated enough times it had lost most of its meaning. "She loves you," Emily said. "She worries about me. Same thing when you're scared for someone." He looked at the letter. "I don't want—" He stopped. "The widow she's bringing. She's a perfectly decent woman, I'm sure. She doesn't know anything about me. She doesn't know about the nights I can't get Lily settled. She doesn't know about the morning I stood on the porch in October." He shook his head. "She'll come out here and see a ranch and a widower and a baby, and she'll think it's one kind of thing. And it's not. It's harder than it looks," Emily said. "Yes. Daniel." She came and sat across from him at the table. "You don't have to decide anything about your sister's plans right now. The storm hasn't even broken. And—" She stopped. He looked at her. "And you don't know yet what you want," she said. "That's all right. You don't have to know." He held her gaze. "What do you want?" he said. "When the storm breaks, what are you going to do?" The question was simple, and it was enormous, and he asked it plainly, the way he asked all things directly, without softening it for her, because he'd learned in 3 days that she didn't want to be softened for. "I don't know," she said. "Where were you going before the storm?" "I told you, I didn't have a destination. And now—" She looked at her hands on the table, the wrapped one, the unwrapped one, "and now," she said carefully, "I know that I was wrong about some things I thought were permanent." He waited. He was very good at waiting. She'd learned that about him. "I thought I was done wanting things," she said. "I thought the wanting had gone out of me. With Thomas, with Grace. I thought whatever part of a person generated hope had just broken, and that was the end of it." She turned her wrapped hand over on the table. I'm not sure that's true anymore, and I don't know what to do with that. He was looking at her with an expression she'd seen building over 3 days and was only now prepared to read clearly. "Emily," he said, and stopped. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything yet. You're about to say something you've been building toward for 2 days, and I need you to think very carefully about whether it's the right moment." He was quiet for a beat. "Why?" he said, not defensively, genuinely asking. "Because I am not in a position to answer it properly yet." She met his eyes. "Because I have been in this house for 3 days, and I arrived here not caring whether I survived, and I am not the same person I was 3 days ago, but I am not. I need more time than 3 days. Do you understand?" "Yes," he said. "Do you?" "Yes." Steadier this time. "I wasn't going to ask you to make any decisions. I was just going to say—" He stopped again. Reset. "I was going to say that I haven't felt like there was a reason to make this place better in a long time. And the last 3 days I've wanted to fix the loose board on the porch steps, and I have no idea what to do with that." She stared at him. He looked somewhat embarrassed. "I know that's a small thing." "No," she said. "That's not a small thing. That's exactly the right size thing." He turned the letter over, looked at the blank back of it. "She's coming in 2 weeks, he said. "My sister." "I know." "I'll tell her the neighbor can't come." "That's your choice." "Yeah." He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. "It is." They sat at the table in the particular quiet that followed when 2 people had come as close to the edge of something as they were willing to go today, and had by mutual unspoken agreement stepped back 1 foot. Not away, just back 1 foot. Lily woke up and made her feelings about this known in the way she made all her feelings known, and Daniel pushed back his chair and went to get her, and Emily watched him go, and she pressed her hand flat on the table, the wrapped one, and felt the mild pulse of the burn, and used it the way she'd been using discomfort for a year, as proof she was still here. Still here. Still feeling things. Still apparently capable of being surprised by the directions feelings could move in. The afternoon deepened into early evening, and they cooked supper together for the first time. Not Emily cooking and Daniel sitting. Not Daniel making biscuits while Emily watched, but actually together, both of them at the stove, him cutting the salt pork while she managed the beans, reaching past each other in the small kitchen with the automatic adjustments of people who had spent enough hours in the same space to have mapped it. At one point, he reached for the salt at the same time she did, and their hands met on the tin, and neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said, "Go ahead," and he took it, and neither of them said anything else about it. But the air in the kitchen had a specific quality after that, charged and careful and not unpleasant. And Emily directed her attention to the beans with the focused application of a woman who understood that some things needed to be given room to settle before anyone poked at them. Supper was good. Better than anything they'd made separately. She thought about that and decided not to mention it. After they ate, after Lily was settled, after the dishes were cleared, Daniel sat at the table with paper and a stub of pencil, and he was writing a letter. She could see working at it with the careful attention he brought to everything that mattered. "To your sister?" she asked. "To my sister." He didn't look up. Telling her the plans have changed. Emily sat in the rocking chair, opened the pocket watch, Thomas's watch, and held it in her palm. She did this sometimes in the evenings, not looking at it, just feeling the weight of it. Proof that things had been real. "Can I see it?" Daniel asked. She looked up. He was looking at the watch, the letter set aside. She crossed the room and handed it to him. He took it with the care a person gave to something that belonged to someone else, in ways beyond possession. He turned it over and read the inscription on the back the way he'd read it the first time. Forward always. E. "Did he know?" Daniel asked. "When you had that engraved, did he know what it would mean?" "I think he hoped it would mean a lot of things," Emily said. "I don't think he knew what they'd all be." Daniel turned the watch over to the face, watched the hands move for a moment. Then he handed it back. "He knew you," Daniel said. "The engraving forward always. He knew you'd need the direction. He knew you wouldn't stop moving on your own, but you might need a reminder of which way." She took the watch, looked at it, She had not thought about it that way before. She had carried the inscription as accusation for a year forward. Thomas forward to this, and it had not occurred to her that it might have been a gift instead of a demand. "Maybe," she said, her voice very quiet. "Yeah." He picked up his letter. "I think so." She went back to the rocking chair. She held the watch, and the fire burned, and the blizzard ran outside, and Daniel finished his letter with the scratch of pencil on paper. And it was the third evening, and something was happening in this house that neither of them had looked for, and neither of them quite knew how to hold. The knock came at full dark. It was hard and fast, and all wrong, too urgent, too late, the knock of someone in trouble. Daniel was on his feet before Emily had fully registered the sound. He had the rifle off the wall in one movement, not panicked, just automatic, the reach of a man who lived alone in a remote place and understood that a knock at full dark in a blizzard meant something was wrong. He went to the door. Emily stood behind him with Lily in her arms, having moved to the cradle without quite deciding to. He opened the door. The man on the porch was old, 60 or more maybe, and he had been in the storm too long. His coat was wrong for the weather, not a ranching coat, a town coat, and it was soaked through, and he was shaking in a way that was past shivering into something more concerning. Behind him, barely visible through the snow, Emily could make out a horse standing with its head down. "Roy," Daniel said, and she heard recognition in his voice shift immediately to alarm. "Roy, what happened?" "My horse threw me." The old man's voice was working, but just barely. "Off the ridge road. I've been walking. I saw your light." Daniel took him by the arm and pulled him inside without ceremony. Emily was already moving. She set Lily in the cradle. The baby woke and complained, and she said "stay" in a tone that surprised even her and actually worked, and she went for blankets. She had the sense developed over 3 days of close quarters of exactly where things were in this house. Top shelf of the chest in the hall. The heavy wool ones that Daniel used for the barn. She was back in 40 seconds. She handed Daniel the blankets, and he wrapped the old man Roy and steered him to the chair nearest the stove, and Emily was already at the water basin, feeling his hands, which were the wrong color. Not black, thank God, not frostbitten past hope, but white and waxy and dangerous. "How long were you in the storm?" she asked. "I don't, maybe 2 hours, maybe more." Roy was talking through chattering teeth. "I came out from Greer's place. I know the ridge road in summer. I didn't think—" "No," Emily said. Not an accusation, just acknowledgement. She pressed her warm hands around his. "Can you feel this?" "Starting to." He winced. "Hurts." "Good. Hurting is good." Daniel crouched down in front of the old man, looking at his face, checking his eyes. "Roy, are you hurt anywhere? When the horse threw you, did you hit anything?" "My shoulder, left one." He tried to move it and went gray. "I don't think it's broke, but it ain't right." "Don't move it." Daniel looked at Emily. She was already assessing. "Keep his hands warm. I need more hot water and a strip of cloth to immobilize that shoulder. And he needs something warm inside him, the coffee's still hot." She said it to Daniel not as instructions exactly, more the way two people talked when they'd gotten used to working together, and Daniel went for the coffee without a word. Roy was looking at her with the slightly dazed focus of a man whose body was still deciding whether it was in crisis. "You Walker's wife?" he asked. Emily paused. "No," she said. "I'm a guest. I got caught in the storm same as you." Roy blinked. "Oh." He looked at Daniel returning with the coffee, looked back at Emily. "Huh," he said in the tone of a man filing something away. "Don't huh," Emily said. "Drink your coffee." He drank his coffee. The next hour was busy, in a way that didn't leave room for anything else. Checking Roy's hands and feet for real damage, deciding the shoulder was badly wrenched and not broken. Improvising a sling from a strip of linen, getting enough warmth back into the old man to stop the shaking. Persuading him that the horse could wait 10 minutes, and the horse was in fact fine. Daniel had gone to check and come back to confirm. Roy was from a homestead about 4 miles east. He'd known Daniel since Daniel's father was alive. He was garrulous in the way of men who lived alone and had stored up more words than he got to spend, and once the crisis had passed and the warmth was working back into him. He talked steadily and with considerable energy about the storm, the ridge road, the state of his horse's shoes, his neighbor, Greer's wife's pie-making, and the time in 1882 that a storm twice this bad had buried the Millhaven Valley for 3 full weeks. Emily listened and refilled his coffee and let him talk because she understood the specific hunger of a person who'd been alone with themselves too long. Daniel sat across from the old man and listened with the patient attention of a man doing his neighbor the courtesy of genuine reception. He asked the right questions. He laughed in the right places. Emily realized good at this, at the ordinary work of human decency, the maintenance of the small bonds that held people together in places like this. She had thought of him as a man who had retreated from people. She was revising that. He hadn't retreated. He'd just been left without the one person who made the reaching out feel possible. There was a difference. Around 9 o'clock, Roy looked at Lily, asleep in her cradle, and then at Emily in the rocking chair, and then at Daniel and said, "You're doing all right, son. Better than you think." Daniel looked at the fire. "Trying," he said. "That's all anybody does." Roy finished his coffee. "Your daddy would be proud of you, raising that little girl by yourself, keeping the place going." He nodded toward Emily. "Having the sense to let someone help when help shows up." "She helped me," Daniel said. "I mostly just opened the door, son." Roy set down his cup. "That's the whole thing right there, opening the door. Half the people in this valley would have looked at a stranger in a blizzard and pulled the bolt. You opened the door." He shook his head. "That's your daddy in you." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I was better at it than me," he said. "He had 40 years more practice." Roy shifted his sling, winced. "Give yourself 40 years. Emily was not looking at either of them. She was looking at Thomas's watch, which was in her palm again, and she was thinking about opening doors, and about what it meant that she had knocked on one, and a man had answered, and what it meant that she had not in 3 days been able to make herself leave. She was thinking about doors in general, about the ones she had let close behind her when Thomas died, about the ones she'd stopped looking for after Grace, about the way a person could get very skilled at not looking for doors and call it survival, and mean it because it was survival, because survival sometimes required exactly that. But she was also thinking about what Roy had just said. Opening the door. That's the whole thing. Daniel had opened his. And 3 days ago in the snow, Emily Carter had knocked. She hadn't known she was looking for a door, but she'd knocked. Roy slept in the guest room that night, Emily's room, and Emily slept on the settle in the front room, which was closer to the fire anyway, and comfortable enough if you folded the blanket right. She lay in the dark with the watch in her hand, and the fire settling, and the blizzard quieter, now genuinely quieter, losing its conviction at last. She heard Daniel through the wall, moving around, settling, the specific sounds of a man winding down a day. Then it was quiet. Then after a while she heard Lily stir. She heard Daniel's footsteps, heard him go to the cradle, heard him in the dark and the quiet talking to his daughter, in that low private voice. Not helpless anymore. Not the desperate negotiating of a man who didn't know what he was doing. Something else. Something that had the shape of a man who was beginning slowly and with effort and considerable ongoing terror to trust himself. "All right, Lily girl," he said. "I got you. I'm right here." The baby made a small sound. "I know," he said. "I know. Come on." Quiet. The soft sounds of a father and his daughter settling back into sleep. Emily lay in the dark and held the watch and listened to the storm making up its mind to end. And she thought, I am not the person who drove that nail into the ground 3 days ago. She didn't know yet who she was instead, but she was going to find out. That was new. That was the first time in 14 months that the finding out felt like something other than a threat. She closed her eyes. She held on to that. The blizzard stopped sometime before sunrise. Emily knew it the same way she'd known Lily's fever had broken, by the quality of the silence. 4 days of constant sound, the wind working at the eaves, the snow driving against the glass, the low roar of weather that had claimed the world and intended to keep it, and then nothing. Just the particular held breath quiet of a world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, still and white and waiting. She lay on the settle in the gray pre-dawn and felt the silence and did not feel relief. She felt the clock start. Roy was up before her. She heard him moving carefully in the guest room, favoring his shoulder, and then he appeared in the doorway, looking considerably better than he had the night before. Color back in his face, eyes clear, the stunned quality of the hypothermic man replaced by the practical energy of one who had things to get back to. "Storm's done," he said. "I know." He looked at her. The kind of look that old men gave when they'd lived long enough to read a room without being told what was in it. "Coffee's on," she said before he could say anything else. He sat down and drank his coffee and accepted the biscuits she made without comment on the quality of them, which was either tact or hunger, probably both. Daniel came out from the back with Lily in his arms, and Lily looked at Roy with the absolute assessment of a baby encountering a new face, decided provisionally that it was acceptable, and went back to examining her own hand. Roy laughed. "She looks like Sarah." Daniel went still for just a moment. Then, "Yeah, she does. Sarah would have loved a storm like this," Roy said. "She used to stand on her mama's porch in the snow and just breathe it, like she was drinking it." "I know," Daniel said quietly. Roy looked at him. "You're doing right by her son. By both of them." Daniel looked at Lily. Didn't answer. But he stood a little straighter, the way a person stood when they'd received something they needed and didn't know how to hold. After breakfast, Roy checked his horse, which had weathered the night in Daniel's barn, with professional indifference, and announced that he could make the 4 miles home easy enough if he went slow. Daniel helped him saddle and gave him 2 days' worth of provisions from the cellar, and Roy accepted them without argument, which said everything about how close the call had been the night before. At the door, Roy stopped and looked back at Emily. "You staying on?" he asked. Direct, no decoration. Emily felt Daniel behind her go careful and still. "I don't know yet," she said. Roy nodded slowly. "Well." He put his hat on. "This valley could use more women who know how to hold a burn and manage a fever and keep a man's head above water all at once." He glanced at Daniel. "Just saying." He went out. Daniel came to stand beside Emily in the doorway, and they watched Roy pick his careful way through the snow-covered yard and find the road. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then Daniel said, "You don't have to decide today." "I know. But you're thinking about it." She turned from the door, went to get Lily, who was starting to express opinions from her cradle. "I'm thinking about a lot of things," she said. He let it go. That was one of the things she had learned about him in 4 days. He knew when to let things go. It was a rare quality, in anyone rarer in men who cared about the outcome, and she appreciated it enough to have noticed it 3 separate times before now. The morning had the strange suspended quality of aftermath. The work that needed doing was obvious. Daniel had to check every fence line, every water tank, every head of cattle on the property after 4 days of blizzard. It was a full day's work minimum, probably more, and he needed to start immediately. But he kept not leaving. He did the barn first. Then he came back in. Then he found something to adjust on the stovepipe. Then he stood at the table and drank a cup of coffee he'd already finished 10 minutes ago. "Daniel," Emily said, not looking up from the bread she'd started. "Yeah." "Your cattle are still in that field?" "Yeah. They've been there since yesterday morning." "I know." She looked up. Howe was looking at her with an expression she recognized now, the one that was about something he hadn't figured out how to say yet. In 4 days, she had learned the architecture of his silences. Some were comfortable, some were processing some. Were this a man with words in him that couldn't find the door? "I'll be here when you get back," she said. He went very still. She held his gaze and said it again, simply without ornament. "I'll be here when you get back. Go check your cattle." He opened his mouth, closed it. Something moved across his face. Relief, and something larger than something that didn't have an easy name. Something that looked like a man who had been white-knuckling a very long drop and had just found solid ground. "All right," he said. He took his coat. He took his gloves. At the door, he looked back at her once, just briefly, And then he went out into the white morning. Emily stood at the stove and pressed her hands flat on the edge of the work table and breathed. She had not planned to say that. Or perhaps she had been planning it since last night, lying on the settle with the watch in her hand, feeling the clock start when the storm stopped, understanding that the world was going to reassert its claims on her by morning, and doing a quiet private accounting of what she was and wasn't willing to give up. What she wasn't willing to give up had surprised her. She picked up Lily from the cradle, held the baby against her shoulder, and stood at the window and watched Daniel moving across the snow-covered yard, his breath making small clouds in the cold air, his stride purposeful and sure. She watched until he disappeared into the far barn. "Your daddy," she told Lily quietly, "is a very stubborn man who does not know how good he is at things." Lily grabbed her ear. "I know," Emily said. "I'm working on it." The morning moved with the particular rhythm of aftermath. Emily cleaned, organized, took inventory, both of the kitchen and of herself. The kitchen was better stocked than she'd initially assessed a man who prepared seriously for hard winters. Herself, she did the accounting carefully, without mercy and without drama. The grave in Mill Haven was real. Thomas was gone. Grace had never had the chance to be here. Those were facts, and they would always be facts, and she had spent 14 months treating them as conclusions when they were actually just losses. Enormous, devastating, real. But not the same thing as the end of the story. She had believed they were the end of the story. She was standing in evidence to the contrary. Around midday, the evidence walked back through the door covered in snow and smelling of cattle and cold air, and turned out to have a cut on his left hand that he hadn't mentioned. "Sit down," Emily said the moment she saw it. "It's nothing. Daniel Walker, if you say those words to me one more time about something that is demonstrably not nothing, I will—" She stopped. "Sit down." He sat down. She got the kit. She knew where it was, now had reorganized it slightly 3 days ago, without asking, because the previous arrangement had made no sense, and cleaned the cut, which was more serious than nothing, but not quite as serious as her heart rate had suggested in the first moment. "Wire," he said. "Going through the drifts to check the second tank line. Didn't see it." "Hold still." He held still. He watched her work with the same attention he brought to everything precise, unhurried, missing nothing. "You said you'd be here when I got back," he said. "I know what I said. I've been thinking about it all morning." "I know." "Emily." She tied off the bandage. "I know," she said for the third time, and sat back and looked at him directly. "I said it. I meant it. I meant I'll be here when you get back today. And I meant—" She stopped. "And," he said. The word sat between them. She had spent the morning doing the accounting. She had been thorough. She owed him the result. "And I don't want to leave," she said. "I don't know what that means yet. I don't know what it is I'm asking for or offering or any of it. I just know that I rode into that storm 4 nights ago not caring what happened next, and I care now. I care what happens next. And this is where I am when I started caring again." He looked at her. A long level look. "Then stay," he said. "It's not forever, not with any kind of promise attached to it. Just don't leave yet." He leaned forward on his elbows. "Stay through the week. Help me figure out what I'm doing wrong with the evening feeding. Help me write back to my sister. Just—" He paused. Tried again. "I've been alone in this house for 9 months, and I forgot what it was like to not be alone. And I don't want to forget again yet." Emily looked at her hands. The bandaged one, the healed one. "That's a practical argument," she said. "I'm a practical man." "You are not only a practical man." He held her gaze. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." The afternoon took a turn none of them had planned for. They were in the front room, the quiet domestic arrangement that had become oddly natural. Daniel at the table, writing to his sister Emily in the rocking chair, with Lily working on the repairs to a blanket that had begun to unravel at one edge, both of them comfortable in the silence when horses came up the road, more than one, moving fast for the conditions. Daniel was at the window before Emily had fully processed the sound. She watched his posture change, not alarmed exactly, but alert. a shift in the set of his shoulders that said he was reading something from Who Was Coming and didn't like the first lines. "Who is it?" she asked. "Alderman Cole." He said it flat. "And someone I don't recognize." He went and got his coat. He didn't get the rifle, but Emily noticed where his eyes went before he decided not to. She stood up with Lily and went to the window. Two men on horseback picking their way through the snow. The first she could identify without knowing him, a man who wore his prosperity in the way he sat a horse upright and deliberate, the posture of someone accustomed to being looked at. Town coat, good hat horse that cost more than most families earned in a season. The second man she didn't recognize. Younger. Harder looking. Daniel went outside to meet them. Emily watched through the glass. She couldn't hear what was said. She watched the body language Daniel still and contained Alderman Cole doing most of the talking, gesturing once toward the house and once toward the east field. The second man sitting his horse with the particular patience of someone who was there for a purpose and was waiting for it to arrive. After about 3 minutes, she saw Daniel's jaw set. She put Lily in the cradle and went to the door and opened it. "Not a discussion, Walker." Cole's voice carried now in the cold air. "The eastern water rights go with the Hendricks parcel. Your father's original agreement specified tributary access only. You've been drawing from the main branch for 2 seasons. "My father's agreement," Daniel said with perfect control, "specified shared access. I've got the documentation. Your documentation is 1 page written by a man who's been dead for 6 years. Cole's voice had the smooth certainty of someone who'd prepared this. "My attorney has the county registration. The branch runs through deeded Hendricks property. You've been trespassing water access." Emily came down off the porch. Both men looked at her. Cole's assessment was immediate and unsubtle. She saw it, the cataloging, the conclusions drawn and filed. "Mrs. Walker," he said. And the assumption in it was so complete, so casual, that she understood in an instant exactly what he was doing. I was establishing a fiction that served him. If she was Daniel's wife, her presence here for 4 days was ordinary. If she was something else, a question, a complication, it was leverage. "My name is Emily Carter," she said, clear and even. "I'm a guest. I got caught in the storm." Cole smiled. It didn't reach anything. "Of course." He looked back at Daniel. "The point stands, Walker. I'm giving you fair notice before I take it to the county judge. You'll want to get your documentation in order." "My documentation is in order," Daniel said. "Has been for 6 years. Then you'll have no trouble presenting it." Cole gathered his reins. "Pity about the storm. I imagine you've got fence damage. The Hendricks parcel has first right of repair on the shared line, just so you're aware." He looked at Emily once more. "Ma'am." He touched his hat. "Walker." He turned the horse. The second man followed without having said a single word, which was somehow more unnerving than anything Cole had said. They watched them ride back down the road. Emily stood in the snow in her indoor boots and felt the cold working through the leather and didn't move until the horses were out of sight. "How long has he been at you?" she said. 2 years. Daniel's voice was level. Since his son married into the Hendricks family, and suddenly Cole developed an interest in water rights he'd ignored for a decade. He turned back toward the house. "Come inside. You're not dressed for this." She followed him in. "Is your documentation actually in order?" she asked. "Yes." He went to the stove, added wood, didn't look at her. "My father kept good records. I have the original agreement, the county filing, and 3 letters from the previous Hendricks owner confirming shared access." He paused. "But Cole has money, and I have cattle. Legal fights cost time I don't have, and money I can't spend. So he's counting on you to fold. He's been counting on it for 2 years. She looked at him. "Have you talked to anyone? A lawyer?" "Lawyers in this county know Cole." He finally turned around. "Emily, this is, you don't need to get pulled into this. I'm already in this room while you're telling me." "That's not the same thing." "It is a little bit the same thing." She sat down. "Tell me what the documentation says, exactly." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him deciding the specific debate of a man who had learned to handle things alone and was encountering the genuine alternative for the first time. He went to the chest by the window, pulled out a tin box, set it on the table. Inside was a paper she could tell was original, the particular quality of old ink on old paper, handled but preserved. He smoothed it on the table, and she leaned in and read. It was clear. Not in the language of lawyers, but in the plain, direct language of men who settled things with handshakes and documented them for posterity. Shared access to the main water branch, both properties equally in perpetuity. Signed by Daniel's father and the Hendricks owner of 1869. Witnessed. This is unambiguous, she said. I know that. Cole knows that too. Yes. He's not expecting to win in court. She looked up. He's expecting to exhaust you until you give him something. Access payment part of the East Field. He doesn't need the water. He needs you to bend. Daniel's expression changed. Not surprised she was telling him something he'd already understood, but something else. The look of a man who'd been fighting a thing alone long enough that having someone else see it clearly felt almost like relief. That's been my read, he said. So don't bend. She sat back. Get the documentation to a lawyer outside this county. There are firms in Billings that don't know Cole from Adam. Your sister's in Billings, she can recommend someone. And in the meantime, document everything. Every visit, every word, every... She stopped. He was looking at her with that expression again. The one she was learning. What, she said. You're strategizing my legal problem. Someone has to. You've been here 4 days. I'm aware. Emily. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, something warmer and more careful at once. Why does this matter to you? She considered the question. Because he came onto your land and tried to use my presence here as a card, she said. And because the look on your face when he rode up told me you've been carrying this alone for 2 years and it's been wearing you down and you've got enough to carry. She met his eyes. And because this is a good place, I can see that. And I don't like watching people try to take good things from the people who built them. The silence after that was the loudest thing that had happened in 4 days. Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and said, All right, tell me what you think I should do first. And she did. They spent the better part of 2 hours at that table, going through the documentation, talking through the approach. Emily asking questions, and Daniel answering them, both of them. Building the case with the focused attention of people who understood that some problems could be solved if you were willing to look at them clearly and not panic. Lily woke up in the middle of it, and Daniel got her without breaking the thread of the conversation, settled her in his arm, and kept talking, referencing the papers with his free hand. And Emily watched this, a man who could hold his daughter and manage a legal strategy simultaneously, and felt something locate itself in her chest that she hadn't had a word for in a very long time. By the time the light went gray and early again, they had a plan. Letter to a Billings attorney. Copy of the documentation sent with it. Written record of today's visit. A clear position and the will to hold it. He'll come back, Daniel said. Let him. He looked at her. You say that like you'll be here. She held his gaze. I said I'd be here when you got back this morning. And now, she looked at the table. At Thomas's watch, which she'd taken out at some point during the afternoon without quite deciding to. At the documentation laid out in careful order. At Daniel's hand with its fresh bandage resting on the table next to it all. And now, she said, I think I'd like to write a letter to someone in Millhaven, to tell them I'm not coming back anytime soon. He was very still. And I'd like to ride into the nearest town when the road's clear, she continued, and send it. And I'd like to... She stopped, steadied. I'd like to not decide the rest of it yet, if that's all right. That's all right, he said, immediately. No hesitation. I want to be clear. I'm not saying anything about the future. I don't know what I'm saying about the future. You're saying you're not leaving yet. Yes. That's enough, he said. She looked at him. Is it, Emily? He leaned forward slightly. 4 days ago, you knocked on my door in a blizzard, and you'd been out in it long enough that I wasn't entirely sure you were all right. And I've watched you go from whatever you were when you got here to this, to whatever this is. He spread one hand flat on the table, a gesture she'd started to recognize as his version of emphasis. "I'm not in a hurry. I've been here by myself for 9 months. I can wait while you figure out what you want. I just need to know you're not going to disappear on me." "I'm not going to disappear on you," she said. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man receiving a thing as given. They made supper again. Together. The kitchen had stopped feeling like his kitchen with her in it, and started feeling like a kitchen two people were operating, in which was a different thing entirely. She knew where the salt was, and he knew she liked the coffee stronger than he did, and they adjusted for these things without discussion. After supper. After Lily was down. After the fire was built up for the night, Daniel came and sat across from her in the second chair by the stove. The chair that had been there all along, that he'd never sat in before, because there'd been no one to sit across from. He sat in it now. He had a book, something practical, a record of acreage, and yields the kind of book that was reading only in the loosest sense. But he had it open, and he was making notes in the margin. Emily had the watch. She was reading its face, which she'd avoided doing for a year because the moving hands had felt like accusation time going on without Thomas in it. She looked at them now, and they were just hands. Just time. Doing what time did. Forward always. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," he said. His own words returned. She almost smiled. The loose board on the porch steps. He looked up. "You said you'd been wanting to fix it," she said. "Since we talked. That's what you said you wanted to do." "Yeah." "Did you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Not yet," he said. "Why not?" "Kept finding other things to do." "Daniel." "I know." He set the book down. "I know. I'll do it tomorrow." "I'll hand you the nails," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. And there it was, that real laugh again, the one that changed his face, the brief and genuine thing. "Yeah," he said. "All right." Outside, the Montana dark was enormous, and the stars were coming through for the first time in 4 days. Punching through the cleared sky in their hundreds, indifferent and brilliant and permanent. The cold had deepened with the clearing, the particular bite of post-storm cold that had no ambiguity in it. But inside the stove was going strong. And the rocking chair had been moved sometime in the last 4 days, exactly 6 inches closer to the second chair. Neither of them had mentioned it. Neither of them moved it back. Emily sat in the rocking chair, and Daniel sat in the second chair, and they were quiet in the way of two people who had said enough for one day, who had moved enough pieces to know the shape of the board, who were learning what it felt like to be still in the same room without needing to fill every silence. Lily slept. The fire worked. The stars held. And the clock on the mantel, the one Thomas had not given her, the one that was just a clock doing its job, ticked forward. As it always did. As it always would. Daniel fixed the porch board the next morning. Emily heard the hammer before she'd finished the first cup of coffee. 3 clean strokes. A pause. Pause 2 more. The sound of a man doing a thing he'd been putting off long enough that doing it finally had the quality of a decision. She stood at the stove and listened to it, and felt something shift in her chest, small and precise, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. She brought him coffee when he was done. He took it without breaking stride, already moving to check the next board, crouching down to test it with his boot. "This one's soft too," he said. "Should have done this in October." "You were busy in October." "I'm always busy." He stood up. "That's not the same thing as a reason." She looked at him. "No," she said. "It ain't." He looked at her over the coffee cup. That almost smile. The real one underneath it just barely visible. "I'll need more nails," he said. She went and got them. That was how the first morning after the storm passed, with hammer strikes and coffee, and the sound of something being repaired, the ordinary music of a house that had decided to keep going. The roads were still buried deep impassable until someone ran a plow through which Roy had told them might take 2 days or might take 4, depending on what the county had going on. They were not going anywhere. Emily found she did not mind. She found more specifically that the word stranded had stopped applying. A person was stranded when they wanted to leave and couldn't. That was not what this was. This was something that had no word yet, and she was learning to be comfortable in the unnamed space. The letter to Millhaven took her most of the afternoon. She sat at the table with Daniel's good paper and his better pen, and she wrote 3 versions before she had one she'd send. The first was, too cold, just information, no humanity in it. The second was too much 14 months of grief, trying to get out through a single letter, which was not fair to the recipient or useful to anyone. The third was right plain and honest the way she'd learned to be in 4 days, with a man who didn't know how to receive anything but the plain truth. She was telling the woman who'd been managing her house, her neighbor Margaret, 63 years old, widowed herself, who had been coming twice a week to air the place and had never asked to be thanked that she wasn't coming back yet. That she was safe. That the house could be closed up properly, the furniture sheeted, the garden put to rest. That some things took longer to figure out than other things. That she was grateful. Daniel came in while she was sealing it and looked at the letter and then at her face. "All right," he said. "Yes." She set it on the table. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "When your wife died," she said, "did you know right away that you were going to stay on the ranch, or did you think about leaving?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I thought about it every day for 2 months," he said. "Leaving. Selling everything, going somewhere that didn't have Sarah in every corner of it." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "And then one morning, I went out to the barn at dawn, and I looked at the land and I thought she chose this. She chose this land with me. She loved it as much as I did. And leaving would mean the place she loved was just gone, like she'd never loved it." He was quiet for a moment. "I couldn't do that to her." Emily looked at the letter. "Thomas loved our house," she said. "He built the front steps himself. He was so proud of those steps." She paused. "They needed fixing by the time he died. He'd been meaning to get to it." Daniel looked at her. "I fixed them before I left," she said. "The morning I drove the nail into Grace's cross. I fixed Thomas's steps first." She hadn't told anyone that. It had seemed too small to say. "I don't know why. I just couldn't leave them broken." "Because you loved him," Daniel said. "And you loved the house he built." "Yes. And leaving anyway. Felt like I was leaving him." She held his gaze. "But I couldn't stay either. I know that sounds like a contradiction." "It's not a contradiction," he said. "It's just grief. It doesn't follow rules." She nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't." He reached across the table. Not to take her hand, just close enough that the distance between them was a choice rather than a fact. She looked at his hand on the table, and she put hers next to it, not touching close. "I think," she said carefully, "that I may have loved that house as much as I thought because I was trying to hold on to him, and when I couldn't hold any more, you let go of the house instead." "Yes, Emily." His voice was quiet. "Letting go of the house doesn't mean you let go of him." She felt her throat tighten. She pressed her lips together and breathed through it. "I know that," she said. "I know it up here." She touched her temple. "I'm still learning it here." She moved her hand to her sternum. He nodded. He understood that distinction. She could see it in his face, the recognition of a man who'd made the same journey in a different direction, who knew something in his mind for months before he knew it anywhere it mattered. Outside, someone was running a plow down the main road. They could both hear it, the grinding mechanical progress of the county equipment working its way through the accumulated days of snowfall, opening the world back up. The clock started again. Emily heard it. She picked up the sealed letter and held it. 2 days later, the road past Daniel's gate was clear enough to ride. He didn't ask her if she was going. She didn't tell him she was coming back. But she saddled Clover at dawn, and he had the gate open before she got there, and he stood at it with Lily in his arm, and when she rode through he said, "Post office opens at 8. "I know," she said. "There's a general store 2 doors down. We're out of salt." "I know that too." He looked up at her on the horse. "Emily." She looked down at him. He said, "Take your time." She held his gaze. Then she looked at Lily, who was watching her with the focused attention she brought to all departures, tiny and complete and certain. Emily reached down and put 2 fingers against Lily's cheek just briefly. "I'll be back before supper," she said. She rode. The town was called Harwick. She'd known its name from road signs she'd barely registered riding through in the blizzard 4 nights ago, but she hadn't seen it in daylight, and what she saw now was the particular kind of western town that was neither failing nor flourishing, just persisting the way most things persisted through stubbornness and habit and the absence of a good enough reason to stop. She posted the letter to Margaret. She bought salt. She stood in the street for a moment and felt the town assessing her. A woman alone on a good horse, not a face anyone recognized. And this was a small enough place that unrecognized faces got looked at. 2 women coming out of the dry goods store glanced at her and glanced away and said something to each other. A man coming out of the feed store held the door open with a nod that was friendly enough. She had been a stranger in Millhaven her whole life somehow. Even after 7 years there with Thomas, she had never stopped feeling like someone who had arrived recently. She'd thought that was about Millhaven. Standing in the street in Harwick, she began to wonder if it had been about her. She went into the general store, bought the salt, and then, because the woman behind the counter had the open face of someone who answered questions without making them complicated, Emily asked about the valley. The woman, mid-50s, hair silver and pulled back sensibly, looked at her with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had lived her whole life in a small place and could read a newcomer well. "You're staying at Walker's place," the woman said. Not a question. Emily didn't ask how she knew. "Temporarily," she said. The woman wrapped the salt. "He's a good man, had a hard run of it." "I know. His girl's healthy." "She's healthy." The woman looked at her hands on the counter. "You know how to run a ranch." "I know enough." "You staying on?" It was Roy's question, all over again. Direct, no decoration. And this time, Emily had a different relationship with it. She'd spent 2 days since the storm ended, doing the accounting, and she was ready for the question, or as ready as anyone was ever ready for a thing they hadn't fully worked out yet. "I don't know," she said. "I know I'm not leaving today." The woman looked at her for a long moment. "That's enough to start with," she said. She handed over the salt. Emily rode back. The twist came without warning, the way the worst ones always did. She was a quarter-mile from Daniel's gate when she saw the second horse. Not Cole's. She'd memorized Cole's horse, the expensive gray, the way Cole sat it. This was different. A bay hitched at the gate, and the man standing beside it was someone she'd never seen before, younger than Cole, maybe 35, with the look of someone who'd come from a city recently enough that his coat was still wrong for the weather. Daniel was in the yard. He'd seen her coming, and his posture told her everything she needed to know before she was close enough to hear tense, controlled managing something. She came through the gate and dismounted. The stranger looked at her, then at Daniel. "This the woman," he said. "This is Emily Carter," Daniel said. His voice had the flat evenness of someone being very careful. "She's a guest. She's been here 5 days," the stranger said. "In a house with an unmarried man." He looked at Emily with the expression of a man performing moral concern for an audience of one. "I'm Alderman Cole's attorney, Miss Carter. My name is Pratt. I'm here regarding a property matter, but I think your presence has become relevant." Emily looked at Daniel. He gave her the smallest shake of his head. He had it. She stood still. "The water rights issue is a matter of public record," Pratt said. "We'll be filing with the county judge on Monday. That's not what I'm here to discuss today." He opened his coat and took out a paper. "What I'm here to discuss is that Alderman Cole has an interest in the eastern parcel that includes the matter of the current occupant's suitability." "The current occupant," Daniel said, "is me, and I've been here 6 years. Your situation has changed." Pratt's voice was smooth, practiced. "A single man, an infant daughter, an unknown woman living in the house. These are the kinds of arrangements that county welfare boards take an interest in. Alderman Cole sits on that board." The silence that followed was very loud. Emily felt the precision of it. Cole wasn't coming for the water rights. He never had been. He was coming for the ranch, and the water rights were a feint, and this was the actual weapon. Threatening Daniel's fitness as a father. threatening Lily. She felt something cold and very clear move through her. She stepped forward. "Mr. Pratt," she said. He looked at her. "My name is Emily Carter. I am the widow of Thomas Carter of Millhaven. I've been in correspondence with the county clerk in Millhaven for the past 2 days regarding my change of address." She held his gaze, steady, level, lying by implication with the confident precision of a woman who had learned that the most useful lies were the ones built entirely from true things. "My husband held considerable land in the Millhaven Valley. As his widow, I hold that interest. I am not an unknown woman. I am a landowner who has made arrangements to spend the winter in Harwick Valley." She took one more step. "And if Alderman Cole would like to make representations about the domestic arrangements of this household to the County Welfare Board, I would suggest he be very careful about who he asks to sit across a table from his attorney, because I have nothing but time and considerable motive to make his life complicated." Pratt stared at her. Daniel had gone absolutely still. Pratt looked down at his paper, back up at Emily. He had the expression of a man whose script had not accounted for this. "The filing will proceed," he said, but the smoothness had developed a texture. "File away," Emily said. "We'll be there." The "we" landed exactly the way she meant it to. Pratt folded the paper. He looked at Daniel, then at Emily, then at the gate which was still open, which he went through without further ceremony, mounted his horse and left. Emily stood in the yard and listened to the hoofbeats fade. Then Daniel said, "Emily." "I know," she said. "You told him, I told him true things." She turned around. "I am Thomas Carter's widow. I do hold land interest. I have been in correspondence the letter I sent yesterday, and I do have motive." She paused. "I may have implied a more formal arrangement than actually exists." He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Something that was past the almost smile and past the careful, controlled gratitude. Something open and raw and real. "You said we," he said. "I know what I said. Emily." He crossed the yard. He stopped 2 feet from her and looked at her directly the way he looked at everything he was serious about fully, without flinching. "I need you to tell me what that meant." She held his gaze. "It meant I'm not going to stand in your yard and let a man threaten your daughter," she said. "It meant—" She stopped. Tried again. "It meant that I rode back here this morning, and yesterday morning, and the morning before." She put her hand flat on her own sternum. "And it meant that when he said unknown woman, something in me said no. I am not unknown, not in this yard, not to you." He was very close now. "No," he said quietly, "you're not." She kept her eyes on his. "I told you I don't know what the future looks like. I'm not walking back on that. It's true. I don't know." "I know you don't. But I know that I fixed Thomas's steps before I left because I couldn't leave them broken. And I know that the first night I was here, I heard you through the wall and I got up anyway." She breathed out slowly. "And I know that your daughter grabbed my finger and I didn't want to put her down." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What do you want, Emily? Not what you know or don't know. What do you want?" It was the question she'd been orbiting for 5 days. She had done the accounting. She had done it carefully, without mercy, without hope, as a distorting lens. She had lain in the narrow bed and the settle, and counted up what she'd lost, and what remained, and what, if anything, was still growing. "I want to write to the Billings attorney," she said. "And I want to fight Cole. And I want to learn how this ranch runs so that I'm useful in the spring." She paused. "And I want to watch Lily figure out how to walk. I want to be here when she does." His breath came out slow. "And Thomas," he said. Gentle. Careful. "And Grace." "They come with me," she said. "They'll always come with me. I'm not looking to replace. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for—" She stopped. "Forward," he said. She felt it in her chest. Thomas's word in Daniel's mouth becoming a different thing without losing what it was. "Forward," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Not the wrapped one, the other one. His rough thumb ran across her knuckles once, and he held on and she held back. I can't promise you it's going to be easy, he said. The ranch is hard. Coal's going to be a problem. And He stopped. I am not always easy to be around. I know that. I know that too, she said. I've been here 5 days. And you're still here. And I'm still here. He looked at their hands together, then at her. Stay, he said. Not for a week. Not until the road's clear. Just stay. She thought about the grave in the corner of the Millhaven yard. About the steps she'd fixed before she left. About a horse that had stopped in a blizzard and turned her head to the left toward a light and refused to take another step forward until Emily looked where she was pointing. She thought about opening doors. She thought about everything Thomas had known about her when he pressed that inscription into gold. Forward always. Not away from. Not instead of. Forward. She looked at Daniel Walker, who had opened his door to a stranger in a blizzard and hadn't asked her to be anything other than what she was. Who had said grace like it was a gift to say it. Who had sat in the second chair by the stove and not moved it back. Yes, she said. He tightened his grip on her hand. They went inside. Lily was in the cradle awake, both fists raised in that surrender posture, watching the ceiling with the earnest attention of a baby, discovering that light moved across surfaces in the afternoon, and this was apparently worth studying. She heard them come in and turned her head and looked at Emily with the clear, untroubled gaze of someone who had not yet learned to be surprised by the things love did. Emily crouched down beside the cradle. Lily grabbed her finger, held on with both hands this time. Emily felt the grip in her chest deep, certain past the place where language lived. "Hello, Lily girl," she said softly. Lily pulled her finger toward her mouth with the focused intention of a baby who had decided this particular finger was worth investigating, and Emily laughed a real one without permission, surprising her completely, coming up from somewhere she thought had gone silent and apparently had not. Daniel behind her made a sound. She looked back. He was leaning against the doorframe watching them, and his face had the open, unguarded quality of a man who had stopped bracing for the thing he was afraid of and found something else in its place. Something he didn't have a word for yet. Something that was working its way up from the deep place where Thomas's inscription lived in Emily, and the memory of Sarah's too loud laugh lived in Daniel, and Grace's name lived in the air of this house, now spoken and received and not forgotten. "You're going to be impossible to cook for," she told him. "I want you to know that now." He blinked, then laughed. The real one. "Why?" "Because you think food is fuel, and it isn't. And you're going to have opinions about that, and they're going to be wrong, and I'm going to have to be patient about it. I might surprise you." "You've been surprising me for 5 days," she said. "I'm factoring that in." He came away from the door frame and crouched down beside her at the cradle, close enough that their shoulders were an inch apart, and they both looked at Lily, who was still conducting her investigation of Emily's finger, with the rigorous attention of a scientist who had found a promising specimen. "She's going to walk by spring," Emily said. "Yeah. April probably. Maybe late March if she keeps this up." She nodded at the determined grip. "This one doesn't do things halfway." "Wonder where she gets that," Daniel said. Emily looked at him. He looked at her. The almost smile and the real one were the same thing now. She hadn't noticed exactly when that happened. Somewhere in 5 days, the distance between what he felt and what he let show had gotten shorter, and she suspected that process wasn't done, but it had started, and the starting of it was enough. She turned back to Lily. "We're going to fight Cole," she said, "and we're going to win. And this ranch is going to still be here when she's old enough to run it if she wants to." "Yes," Daniel said. "And I'm going to write to Margaret and tell her she can have the rocking chair from the Millhaven house. She always liked it." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" he said. She thought about the rocking chair in Millhaven. She thought about the one beside the stove here, the one she'd moved 6 inches closer to the second chair without quite deciding to. "You've got a perfectly good rocking chair," she said. "I don't need 2. She heard him breathe in, breathe out. "All right," he said. Outside, the Montana afternoon was going gold, the post-storm light hitting the snow at an angle that turned everything amber and quiet and enormous. Neither of them moved to look at it. They stayed crouched beside the cradle where Lily was beginning to get drowsy. Her grip on Emily's finger loosening by degrees, her eyes going heavy with the deep animal trust of a baby who knew where she was safe. Emily stayed until the hand let go. Then she straightened and turned around, and Daniel was standing behind her, and the house around them was warm and real and imperfect, and full of the particular kind of life that grew in places where people had decided against evidence and without guarantees to keep trying. She had ridden into a blizzard 5 nights ago, not caring what came next. She cared now. She cared about the salt on the shelf, and the loose board on the porch, and the letter in the mail, and the attorney in Billings, and the second chair by the stove, and the way Lily said, "Ah," in the morning when she first saw a face she recognized. She cared about all of it, and caring she had forgotten this, had lost it so completely. She'd stopped believing it was still in her caring was not the same thing as being afraid to lose. It was the opposite. It was the thing you did instead of being afraid. It was the choice you made with your whole body fully awake, fully present, knowing exactly what it cost, and choosing to pay it because the alternative was a kind of dying that took longer than the real kind. Thomas had known that about her. He'd pressed it into gold and put it in her hand. Forward always. She had arrived here on a horse that refused to go further into the dark, toward a light that a man had left burning because he was too tired and too alone to think about turning it off. She had knocked. He had opened the door. And somewhere between that knock and this moment, this ordinary, irreplaceable moment in a warm kitchen in a snowbound valley at the edge of winter, Emily Carter had stopped running. She had not found her way back to who she was before. She had found something better, who she was going to be next. And that at last was enough. That was everything.